Hello there. Are you ready for tonight's story? Well, tonight we're going to read The Giant Hug, and it's by Sandra Horning. Are you ready?
"What do you want to send Granny for her birthday?" Owen's mother asked. "A giant hug," Owen replied. He opened his arms as wide as he possibly could to show how giant the hug would be. "Do you want to draw a picture of you hugging Granny?" his mother asked. "No," Owen said. "I want to send a real hug. I'll give the mailman a hug and ask him to send it to Granny." They gathered their letters and walked to the post office in town. Soon they got to the front of the line and Mr. Nevin called out, "Next." "I want to mail a hug to my Granny. Will you please send it?" Owen asked in his most polite voice. "Well, we don't normally send hugs, but I suppose we could give it a try," Mr. Nevin said. Owen's mother wrote down Granny's address for Mr. Nevin. Owen walked behind the counter, opened his arms as wide as he possibly could, and gave Mr. Nevin a giant hug. "Please make the hug just as giant when you pass it to the mailman," Owen said. "Oh, I won't see the mailman who delivers it to your Granny. I give the mail to Mrs. Porter. She sorts it and puts it on a truck to the big city. After that, it's put on a plane and flown across the country," Mr. Nevin said. "Well, you will have to hug Ms. Porter, then," Owen said as Mr. Nevin carried the mail to Ms. Porter. Mr. Nevin looked down awkwardly at Ms. Porter as he handed her the mail and the address of Owen's Granny. He blushed and mumbled, "And, here's the hug." Mr. Nevin opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Ms. Porter a giant hug. Ms. Porter smiled as she sorted the mail. Just then the driver came to collect the mail bound for the big city. As the driver lifted the last heavy bag of mail, Ms. Porter said, "Leroy, one more thing. Someone is sending a hug to his Granny. Here is the address, and here is the hug." Ms. Porter opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Leroy a giant hug. Leroy laughed and said, "Now that's a piece of mail you don't see too often." Leroy whistled on the way back to the big city. After unloading the mail, he checked the schedule to see who was driving the mail to the airport. It read, James. Leroy found James in the break room eating his morning snack. "Hi, James. I know this seems a little odd, but a hug is being sent through the mail to someone's Granny, and this is her address," Leroy said. Leroy opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave James a giant hug. James cringed. He was not the hugging type. After all, he's a porcupine. But he would do his job. Later that afternoon, James arrived at the airport. He asked a mail handler when the mail was being loaded onto the plane. "That mail was taken to the plane a few minutes ago," the mail handler said. James rushed to the plane where Captain Johnson was getting ready to board. "Captain, a kid is sending a hug through the mail to his Granny. Here is the address and here is the hug," James said with a grimace. James opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Captain Johnson a giant hug. "Now, isn't that a grand way to start the day?" Captain Johnson bellowed. When the plane landed, Captain Johnson walked to the airport post office. He saw Amanda standing next to the mail truck looking sad. "Hello, are you driving the truck to the city?" Captain Johnson asked. Amanda nodded glumly. "A hug is being sent through the mail," Captain Johnson announced. Captain Johnson opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Amanda a giant hug. Amanda brightened and said, "Thank you." She bobbed her head to the music as she drove. After unloading the mail, Amanda went to find Chad, the driver taking the mail to Granny's town. "Chad, a hug is being sent through the mail. Here is the address and, well, here's the hug," Amanda said as her face turned red. Amanda opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Chad a giant hug. Chad chuckled and said, "Finally! Do you want to go dancing tonight?" "I'd love to," Amanda exclaimed. Chad kicked up his heels and hopped on his truck. Early the next morning, Chad drove to Granny's town. As he prepared to return to the city, he remembered the hug. "Who will be delivering the mail to Pinside today?" Chad asked the supervisor. "Shelley, but she's not here yet," Mrs. Greenberg replied as she adjusted her glasses. "Please pass this along to her," Chad said. Chad opened his arms as wide as he possibly could and gave Ms. Greenberg a giant hug. Ms. Greenberg gasped with surprise and her glasses tilted to the side. "Shelley, I need a word with you," Ms. Greenberg called when Shelley arrived. "A hug is being sent through the mail to a boy's granny, and you are the mail woman delivering it," Ms. Greenberg said. Ms. Greenberg opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Shelley a giant hug. "Granny will be delighted," Shelley exclaimed. Shelley stopped to smell the flowers as she delivered mail from door to door. She saw Granny gardening in the yard. "Ms. Lewis, I have a special delivery for you," Shelley said. "Your grandson has sent you a hug." Shelley opened her arms as wide as she possibly could and gave Granny a giant hug. Granny grinned and said, "That's the most wonderful piece of mail I've ever received. You send that grandson of mine a big kiss." Granny puckered up her lips and gave Shelley a big wet kiss on the cheek.
I love this story because the hug that the little boy wanted to send to his granny created a chain reaction of hugs, a showing of kindness from the little boy or little pig or whatever he was to the mail clerk, and the mail clerk to the sorting clerk, and the sorting clerk to the mail deliverer, and so on. And some of them, it just made such a difference in their day. Like Amanda, did you notice that she was feeling glum and down in the dumps, and then she got this hug, and it just made her feel so much better that she started smelling the flowers on the way to do her work, and her whole attitude improved. A hug shows affection and approval. A hug is a way that we show people that we like them and that they're worth something. Now, the problem we have right now is that because of this illness in the air, these germs that are in the air that we can't see and that we shouldn't breathe, we can't just go up and start hugging each other. I wish we could, but right now we can't. But you know what we could do is, instead of hugging, is we could have a kind word for everyone. Everyone we meet, if we could think up something kind to say, something that would make them feel good about themselves and about their job, make them know that they are appreciated, let them know that they are worth something. If we could do that to everyone we meet, and then they could do it to others, then pretty soon the world would be at a better place. And that's just what Jesus wants us to do, to show kindness to each other. He calls it showing love. And it's what he showed to us. And you know how much love Jesus showed us? Sure you do. Jesus loves us this much and always showed it. So God bless you. God bless you that you remember always that you are the beloved child he created you to be. Good night.